Rarely has Whitehall seen such a collection of green wellies and Barbour jackets, though in fairness to the thousands of farmers who descended on central London today, they were at least appropriately dressed for the bitterly cold weather. In fact, it is testament to the anger that is felt in the farming community towards Chancellor Rachel Reeves and the changes to inheritance tax she has ushered in that so many of them made the journey. The changes, which will be introduced from April 2025, will mean that farmers with agricultural assets over £1 million will in future pay 20% inheritance tax as they pass farms on to the next generation. The government estimates that will raise around £520 million a year for the Treasury by 2030. Those representing farmers worry it will impact up to 70,000 UK farms. The Treasury estimates that only around 500 will end up paying any tax at all. Huge discrepancy between the two sides. Our political editor, Chris Mason, was watching the protests.
Harvesting an argument, big and small. The essence of this, say the farmers in Westminster today, the next generation, and this.
We've got to change this so that we can pass it down to our daughter and our son so that they can farm or have the opportunity to farm if they want to in the future.
Daughter Evelyn in tow, mum and dad Laura and Robin farm in Nottinghamshire.
That's what it's all about at the end of the day. We're not here to earn money, we're here to pass down.
To sceptics, though, that is seeking to preserve wealth which others can't. Morning, I'm Chris from the BBC. How angry are you?
Fairly angry. I can't say because some words might come out of my mouth that you don't want to hear.
Your debut as a protest, and here you are at the gates of Downing Street.
Yes. I think they should be climbing them, don't you?
Are you tempted?
I would if I was 20 years younger, I probably would.
At the same time, down the road, the National Farmers Union rings its members in for a rallying call. I grab a word with the union's president. Mr Bradshaw, why should farmers be an exception? Others have to pay inheritance tax, why shouldn't you?
Unfortunately, the margins we're making from food production are just so low. On average, it's about a 0.5% return on capital. The sense of betrayal, it's not going away.
And how might that step up? Should people be fearful of food not being on the shelves?
I really hope not. We don't want...
hope not?
We don't want our consumers to bear the brunt of this. This is an issue with an ill-thought-through government policy.
You're not saying no, though. People will worry about that.
I want to be working with the government on delivering the food security agenda.
Richard's a dairy farmer in Gloucestershire, wearing an argument of the heart as well as a colourful jacket.
My farm, our family started farming there in 1822, and my 13-year-old son was with me. He was with me, milking with me on Saturday morning. I'm sorry,
That's all right.
It's just, I'm part of a long chain that I don't want to see broken.
Back outside, opposition politicians are revealing whose side they're on.
This policy is cruel, it is unfair, and it is going to destroy farming as we know it.
You are feeding our families and you're struggling to feed your own. That is just so wrong.
As for the Prime Minister, the man himself's not here. He's meeting world leaders in Brazil.
Look, I do understand their concerns. What I've pointed out is, firstly, that at the budget we put £5 billion into farming over the next 2 years. That's the single biggest amount of money that's being put into farming because I want to support our farmers.
No farmers, no food!
The government's determined not to give in, insisting the existing system's neither fair nor sustainable, and they need the money for schools and hospitals. And the farmers, well, they are determined too. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
Well, to discuss this further, with us tonight, Alex Nelms. He's the National Farmers Union County Chair in Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxford. Thank you very much, Alex, for being with us. Tom Bradshaw, the president of the NFU, said in Chris's report that there is this sense of betrayal, to which the Prime Minister says we've allocated £5 billion over 2 years in the budget, which he says is a substantial commitment to sustainable food production. Is it not?
The trouble is, the promise made to farmers was that this agricultural property relief, that inheritance taxes were not on the table or not being looked at, made by the then DEFRA Shadow Secretary Steve Reed. And so the betrayal comes because, now it's in the budget, that's a change from what was said privately and publicly in the past.
So you're talking about a meeting he went to last year with the NFU in which he categorically said that they wouldn't change the terms.
With the NFU, with the CLA, with farming lobbying organisations, and who would then refer that message back to their members. So that's been shared with farmers, and so that's why that's why emotions are running high.
One of the banners I saw today on the march was the final straw, and I wondered if that is actually the point here, that it's not per se this policy specifically, it's a long litany of policies which haven't supported farmers and the food producers in our country.
Yeah, I'd say that's a very accurate summation. The trouble is that I think really farming has been let down by successive governments who haven't perhaps understood the challenges of growing food in this country. Whether that's been the fact that we're caught between these two opposing forces, things like the increasing capital cost of land and machinery, but the suppressed and low food prices that is paid by consumers, which is to the public's benefits, but not really to farming businesses' benefits.
I wonder if I don't want to get too technical, but I wonder if it's that some in the Treasury don't understand the numbers here, because under these new rules, they've rolled the allowance on inheritance tax in with business property relief. And then there is obviously this £1 million cap, but obviously when you talk about business property relief, you're talking about tractors and combine harvesters, which are very, very expensive, £500,000 for a combine harvester. So if you roll it in with inheritance, in actual fact, that £1 million doesn't go very far, does it?
Well, yes, quite right. That's been the frustration of the NFU, is that it doesn't feel like the Treasury is giving the full picture. They are relying on this the band of figures from 2020, 2021, talking about APR, agricultural property relief, which is farmhouses and land, but not always. Whereas business property relief are your livestock and dead stock, your cows, your sheep, tractors, barns, and sometimes land as well, depending on who your professional advisor is. So it's an incredibly complex topic. But ultimately, at the end of the day, these reliefs are in place to maintain viable farm businesses so that they can continue producing food. It would be no good if every time someone died, the farm was to be broken up. The industry would be on its knees.
There is a rule in place for all of us with respect to inheritance tax where you can pass it on to your children if you get your affairs in order within 7 years. Obviously you put it in trust, and over 7 years you would avoid the tax. Do you think then there should be an exemption for those older farmers who've been caught out by this? I mean, if they're not going to U-turn, should they at the very least look at protecting those who are maybe in their 70s and their 80s who won't get around this?
Well, exactly that. These are all things that Mr. Bradshaw would have discussed with Steve Reed and with James Murray of the Treasury. All these sort of options are what we should be looking at, and what the NFU would like to constructively, contribute towards thinking about and providing data to help that discussion, because that is again why we are the farming community are up in arms, because it will absolutely clobber. Even a small number of farms is unacceptable. We feel so strongly for our fellow farmers that this is an injustice or unfair. And I spoke to several MPs today in Berkshire and Bucks and Oxon, and I brought up the example of my own grandfather. I feel so relieved and guilty that my grandfather passed away in July and he didn't live to see this budget. He would be mortified that he'd been so careful all of his life, farming. He was a first-generation farmer. He started the farm with my grandmother in 1955, and to then find out that he was not going to be able to pass on the business intact to my uncle and myself and my cousin, he'd be just absolutely devastated.